r/AskReddit. Children of teen parents. What was your life like growing up? How is your relationship with your parents now? Close bracket. My father had my oldest sister with his first wife when he was 18 and his wife was 17. My sister's life was pretty unbearable. At the age of 3 my father, then 21, abandoned them and married another woman who he had twins with, and when those twins were 9 months old, he abandoned that family too. Meanwhile my oldest sister went on to be molested by a string of creeper her mom was dating. Not sure if she was born a lesbian, or if she just had so much sexual trauma with men. Not even she knows, but she definitely doesn't care for men. She was 13 when I was born and it just so happened to coincide with her telling her mother that her new stepdad had been raping her. Her mother responded by putting her on a Greyhound cross country to live with my dad, my 23-year-old mom, and me. My mom beat the shit out of her and verbally/emotionally abused her so badly she ran away at about 15. When she came back my dad gave her $20 and put her back on a Greyhound cross country again to her mom's. I think, at that point, she just moved in with a friend and joined the army as soon as she could. It didn't work out though, and she was dishonorably discharged. Can't remember why, though. Anyways, turns out the twins ended up getting a pretty tough break too, though he wasn't a teen when he had them. Their mother became a crackhead, and by the time they were 15 they were living on the streets in the same city as us, but neither they nor us were aware of their presence. Funny enough, despite that my father had no contact with them, my mother had been sending them child support for decades. By the time they found us, they were grown-ups and our father had abandoned us too. Silver lining, the first time we met my mother asked them, before the door even shut, if they had received the money she'd been sending the LA County for them. One of them got on the phone. Apparently the money had just been sitting, appreciating, in an account for them for almost 2 decades and they both received a check for upward of $35k. Not that that makes up for the shitty childhood and bullshit excuse for a father, but it was nice that our first interaction involved just a little bit of retribution. So regardless of how they feel about our father, they definitely love the poop out of us and my mom. In fact, even the oldest one has reconciled with my mother who has had a lot of therapy and apologized profusely for her completely egregious behavior. She was very abusive when her and I were little. Once EPS got involved, when I was in middle school she mellowed out, but she's always been a rager. I was the product of a 15 to 16 year old and her 19 to 20 year old stoner boyfriend. They broke up during the pregnancy, and he was erased from my record mainly because he, at the time, was dealing with some mental and drug abuse issues and my mom didn't want him to use legal power to see me if he would be in that condition. Ended up living with my mom's parents, her little sister, 14 years, and my mom, while she finished up her JED, worked as a waitress, and tried doing the whole community college thing. Home life was pretty strange in retrospect, but felt ideal as I lived it. My entire family archetypes were kind of skewed. I had the parental relationship with my grandparents and viewed my mom and aunt as sisters. My mom's boyfriends always felt like brothers or cool dude friends. The boyfriend that she would eventually marry was like my childhood best friend that I would ride dirt bikes and hunt with. My grandma passed away from cancer when I was 10. Grandpa became pretty alcoholic/depressed. So my mom and fiance/husband, not married at the time, got a house and I went with. Lived a regular lower middle class life after that. Mom became a banker. Her BF was a construction worker/welder. It wasn't until I was 14 that my mom had a kid with her husband, and then another when I was 19, that I realized just how strange our relationship was. I don't think they tried to push me away, but I always felt like an outsider. Like my mom became involved in the church and hung out with all of the other goody moms with their kids that were all in the age groups of my younger half brothers, and I was just a reminder of what she did. And it's no secret, I look just like my biological dad. He was pretty infamous in his prime, so anyone who was at least in high school during the mid-90s in my town can tell I'm my father's daughter. And I'm similar to him too. I started seeing him when I was about 5, which was when he began to straighten up. We are both similar in that we don't have a lot of emotional depth. Like we traveled through the UK together 2 years ago and see each other bi-monthly, but I still wouldn't consider us very close. It certainly isn't as bad as it could have been. I really wouldn't change anything. My grandparents' sole way of parenting was locking me outside to play in the yard all day. I did a lot of drawing and climbing trees. My bedroom was the laundry room, so I grew up sleeping next to an old water heater. But they did a damn fine job at making me really independent because they were both gone by the time I was 12 and I managed just fine. Found my predominant parental figure in my band director, who I would meet when I joined band at age 11. Ended up breaking the statistics for daughters born to teen moms and graduated at the top of my class, got into a good university, and am now in the middle of an engineering degree. I still have contact with everyone. I see my mom about twice a month, since we live within an hour of each other. I see her kids and husband maybe once every 2 to 3 months. Hanging out with my mom is literally like any other date with a friend. We usually go to the mall and she gossips. We talk about sex and money and shenanigans. I think for what she went through, she did alright. She's built herself into something she likes, I think, and is doing good for herself. She's a trooper, man. I would have aborted myself or given myself up for adoption, but she did it, and I didn't have that shitty of a childhood. My mom had me at 15. She had just turned 15 actually. My dad was 19. They met at a skating rink. My mom said she told my dad how old she was that day, but he still acted surprised that she was only 14 and pregnant with his baby. My grandmother, dad's mom, loved me wholeheartedly, but she was terrible to my poor mom. She called my mom a whore and a slut, blaming her for seducing my dad. She was constantly threatening to take my brother and I away from our mom. Even as a weeks-old baby, my dad's mom would demand that I stay with her for weeks at a time. After everyone found out about the pregnancy, my parents got married in my grandfather's backyard and moved in with my grandfather and his wife from a second marriage. My mom's family moved away to another state, and it was just her and my dad's family. When I was born, apparently everyone was all happy, and I did have a good childhood because I was completely loved, but they all left to get lunch and my 15-year-old mom almost died because she started to bleed out. They thought she was just a kid, which she was, and never took her seriously. My mom always talked about her career as an actress and my dad's mom, and tell her to get out of the clouds. My parents had my brother and soon divorced. We didn't always have electricity, and I distinctly remember my mom counting pennies to buy us hamburgers from McDonald's and bruises on her arms from abusive boyfriends, but we made it through. Today my mom is my closest friend, more like my sister. She actually grew up to become a photographer and a model, and I sort of got to witness that. Today, she has given up that world. I'm 28 and she's 43, and she has a degree. She always watched me get my degrees. I have an MFA, and recently she got an AA of her own, and she's working as an occupational therapist. It's almost like I have to give her up a bit, like she's a child, so she can go live the life she wants with her new husband. I don't approve of every decision, but she is the first call I make for any question or any problem or just a need to chat. We live states apart now, so that's difficult, but she will always be my best friend. My parents were both 18 when they had me. My mother was wonderful when I was a child. She handmade my baby food, put it in ice cube trays, and thawed when needed. She put her needs above my own. She had a great job and worked hard for every penny. She tried to give me the life that she couldn't have. Her father sexually abused her, and her mother let it happen. She promised me that she would never put a man above me, that she would make sure I grew up with everything I wanted and needed. One Christmas, she wasn't well off. She bought me a kitchen playset. She wrapped every piece separately, so I would have a lot of presents to open. She was a wonderful mother and I appreciate every single thing she did for me. My father left when I was 6 years old. Never grew up. He has 2 other daughters now. When I turned 11, my mother and I moved across the country with her boyfriend for work. They had a new baby and my aunt moved in with us. So me and my aunt were one unit and they were a family. And that was okay. I didn't mind too much. Her boyfriend leaves when my brother turned 2. My mother fell into a deep depression and I took care of my brother at 14 years old. My mother started drinking to excess and abusing prescription medication. She started insulting me, calling me fat, anything to make me hate myself. When I was 15, my mother first told me she hated me. I was also 15 when my mother first tried to kill herself. She told me I was the reason she was killing herself. From age 15 until now, 21, I've watched my mother try to kill herself probably around 35 times. I've dropped out of high school from stress, taken care of her and my brother, watched her be tackled to the ground by police to sedate her, seen my brother be put in foster care twice, seen my mother hit her boyfriend with a shovel, lose all of my family because she pushed them away, watched her in abusive relationship after abusive relationship, had to clean up the house after her suicide attempts, throw out my deceased dog's seizure meds so she wouldn't abuse them, not take my medications in fear she would steal them. My dog, who was one of the only good things in my life, was hit by a car on the highway and killed because she was too drunk and high to go find him. So I appreciate how much she gave up for me, but I don't think I can get over what she has and continues to put me through. My mom got pregnant with me when she was 17. My dad was the same age, maybe a few months younger. They both dropped out of high school and tried to make it work. It didn't and they split up when I was 2. My dad moved out of state and my mom knew she wouldn't be able to give me a good and stable life, so she gave me to my grandma. I grew up pretty poor, but my grandma always worked 2 or 3 jobs plus went to college to make sure she could provide for me. At the time I didn't really appreciate it and was always resentful that I didn't have as nice of a life as my friends. Their fridges were always full. They were able to do extracurriculars that costed money. They had room for people to come over for a sleepover and their parents had extra time to spend with them. I got to spend time with my mom pretty often, probably around once a month or so, and tended to favor her over my grandma because of that silly resentment thing. Now that I'm an adult, 24, and much past the age my mom and dad were when they had me, I have realized that I can't blame them much for how they acted. They were definitely kids and I can't imagine going through that even at my age now. I still have a good relationship with my mom, even though it gets tougher and tougher as I get older, because she sort of stayed stagnant in her emotional age. Having a young cool mom was great as a kid, but is sort of frustrating and disheartening when I feel more mature and responsible than her. I've also gained a lot of respect for my grandma. She's in a lot of debt and doesn't have a lot of friends or free time, and I know that mostly because she put everything she had into making sure I had a good life when she didn't really even have to. I paid for college by myself with the help of scholarships, grants, and loans. I started living on my own as soon as I could, and now I have a decent job that allows me to help her out with her bills when she needs it. We've gotten to the point where we talk on the phone often, and most of my wrongly placed anger is gone. She recently broke down and said I'm the best thing she'd ever done with her life, and that she was so proud of me. I cried a lot. My biological mom was 16 when she had me. She put me up for adoption to give me a better life than she could provide. My dad disappeared when he found out she was pregnant. He was 17. Adoptive parents brought me home at about 3 months. I'm now 35. I have never and will never have contact with her. I reached out once in my teens, asking for medical history, but somewhat hoping she'd want to talk even a little. I wasn't expecting or even wanted her to be a big part of my life. She gave me the medical history via the agency, closed adoption, with the stipulation that I never contact her again as she was by then married with a family and they knew nothing about me. I can totally respect that. She made a tough choice as a teen and she moved on to build her own life. I'd like to think that she and I think alike. We don't wish anything bad for the other. We just know that biology doesn't necessarily entitle you to anything. My adopted parents offered to get a private investigator to help find her. They still don't believe that I just don't have any interest. I know who I am. I don't need to meet the person who pushed me out in order to feel whole. Edit. A few more facts, because there seem to be a lot of people with similar situations. I know all of the above from what my parents were told via the adoption agency. We had a vague background, but no names or anything that really could have identified my bio mom. I have a brother who is also adopted from a different family. He is 3 years younger. He was told at the same age, 2nd grade, and feels the same as me. We agree that, because it wasn't a secret in our family, we had no reason to feel like anything was wrong so far as our parents were concerned. However, my brother knows more about his bio mom, as his adoption wasn't nearly as top secret. I swear I'm an alien or something, as mine. She wrote him a letter, he knows her name, and a lot about her from the files. But he doesn't care to seek her out. Then again, he doesn't really care to have much to do with our adoptive parents, myself or our stepbros, so I think he just doesn't give a shit. My feelings were never hurt by Biomom's refusal for contact. At all. She made a really tough choice, and I have a good life. She cared enough to let me have a nice life. I care enough to let her continue hers. I mentioned in a comment below that part of the reason I didn't want to meet her is that I honestly was afraid that she would be a terrible person. I don't know that I could live with myself knowing I was related to a bad person. I don't mean a serial killer, although that would be fucked up, but what if she were a drug addict or a manipulative money grubber like my friend's biomom? What if she hated me? This is something I feel okay with not knowing. I would not call myself well adjusted, but I've never really suffered with the issues of identity due to adoption. I hope I don't come off as cold or detached, but it just really didn't matter to me. My dad and stepmom raised me, taught me how to be a good person and work hard to enjoy life. That to me is what matters. Before anyone asks, I do not want kids at all. I like them, but I'm not super responsible with money and stuff, so I just think it's better I don't. Lol. Also, I have chronic health issues that keep me from being very active. I don't know how well I'd do with a kid, but if I did I would adopt. Interesting topic. I was a teen father, 16, and I'm sitting here with my son discussing the purchase of his first car. He'll be 14 this year and we are looking for a small project to start. We could have it fixed up and running before he turns 15 and gets his permit. His mother and I fought a lot while he was young, and I wonder if that's why he doesn't say I love you, he says you too. My wife and I worked through a lot of issues together. We grew up into adults together. We learned how to be adults together. We are still here together, standing next to each other at every obstacle life hands us, leading each other and our family along. I hope we've showed him and our daughter how to fight, how to love, how to work, how to be strong enough when you don't think you can be. We still fight, but we've learned how and what battles to pick. Sometimes, we argued at the grocery store this weekend over what size bottle of ketchup to buy, haha. Most importantly, we've learned together how to make up and love each other, even if the other is an ass that day. Anyways, it's an interesting time to reflect on how he's been brought up and everything I have tried to offer him. He's active in sports. Well, he tore his ACL in December, so he's out for a bit. Has an A/B average in honors classes. He has almost everything he wants, I guess. Maybe not everything he wants, but certainly everything he needs and then some. He's a little lazy, but what kid isn't? We fight and bicker. He won't leave his younger sister alone or let her say even the slightest thing wrong without correcting her. Hell, they argued over her borrowing a pencil to do her homework earlier. Just kind of hit me that I'm doubting his responsibility level if I buy him something and make it nice and he ruins it. Gotta let him fly eventually though, right? He's a good kid. He's got this. He's a smart kid with a level head. Probably the only 13-year-old kid I can confidently say doesn't say a single swear word out of earshot. And one day he won't have me to guide him through it. He'll need the freedom now while I'm here. My mother was 18 when I was born. My dad said she died giving birth to me, and so my father, who was 17 at the time, raised me on his own. He was the youngest of 7 children, but all of his siblings were much older, had lives of their own, and lived in different places around the country. My grandparents weren't exactly the most supportive people. They tried to convince my dad to tell my mom to have an abortion, but he refused, so I didn't really grow up around them either. One of uncles lived not too far from us, though, so he was able to help take care of me from time to time. Now I don't know how he did it, but despite being a single dad at 17, he was able to finish high school on time and go to college. If my uncle wasn't babysitting me, my dad would just bring me to his classes. My dad was a mechanic, a carpenter, an electrician. He basically did everything. He worked multiple jobs for as long as I could remember. Despite all of that, we were still struggling financially, and while my uncle did try to offer us a place to stay, my dad just really wanted to at least try and make it on his own. He fixed up a truck, and from the time I was about 5 until I was almost 7, that truck was our home. We basically lived on the road for 2 years, always driving to different places for his job. I wasn't able to go to school because we were all over the place, but my dad was able to find time to teach me how to read and write, as well as some math. That was his favorite, not so much mine, though. Since he always took me to work with him, all I did was read and read to pass time. Just after I turned 7, my dad was able to get a small 1-bedroom house near my uncle's place for a great price. He fixed that up by himself. I like to think that I contributed in some way, but thinking back now, I probably broke more than I helped fix, lol. The neighborhood was actually pretty good, and I was able to go to school. The following September, I started the 2nd grade, and I loved it. My teachers were actually surprised that I was doing so well despite it being my first time in school ever. They didn't know it was because I had a fantastic teacher at home. Close bracket. Over the next few years that followed, things started to get better for us. We lived efficiently with little to no excess, and soon, my dad had saved up quite a bit of money. We were no longer living from paycheck to paycheck, so he started a college fund for me. He wanted to make sure that I wouldn't struggle, so he prioritized that first. Unsurprisingly, my grandparents started to treat us nicer. My aunts and uncles started to visit us more. I was just a kid, but I knew how badly they treated my dad. I knew they were only nice now that he proved to all of them that he wasn't just a worthless kid who became a father too early. I probably hated them more than he did, but he told me that some people are just like that, and it would be a waste of time trying to make them change. Then, when I was 12, my uncle pulled me out of school to tell me that my dad had been in a car accident on the way to work. It was a hit and run, and the person left my dad alone on the side of the road in his total truck. He was in a coma for weeks before they finally took him off life support. Just like that, my dad was gone, and in summary, you could say that I was too. My uncle helped to cover most of the medical bills, then sold a house and put everything under my name. Despite the major setback, I was still financially set for college, and probably a good couple of years after that, but my father's death left me completely devastated. I lost all of my motivation to go to school. I really just wasn't the same anymore. My dad made me who I was, and without him, I couldn't be myself. I lived with my uncle for the first few months after my dad died, but soon, my grandparents started offering to take care of me. My uncle was a busy guy and was rarely ever home, so it seemed like the best choice to make. I was barely going to school anyway. I ended up leaving everything behind and moved across the country to live with my grandparents. Like I said before, they were pretty nice to me at first, but things quickly went downhill. My grandfather would tell me that, because of my dad's mistakes, I was now their burden to bear. He was an alcoholic and often physically and verbally abusive too. For the rest of my teenage years, I lived in that hellhole. I admit that I wasn't the world's greatest teenager, and for the first couple of years I was just downright depressed. By the 11th grade, I started to pick everything up again because I realized that I was around the same age that my dad had me. I started to focus more on school and spent more time there or in any after school program I could find than at home. I also kept trying to go back to living with my uncle, but my grandparents kept pushing it off and eventually I just stopped asking. Somehow, they managed to get their hands on the money my dad had saved for me, and as you could probably expect, they just blew it all on God knows what. I didn't even realize that they did that until I was applying for college and realized I didn't have the money to pay for it. I had no idea what to do from there. If there was a way to get it all back, I didn't know what it was, nor did I know who to ask. I cold gotten a loan, but the fact that they threw away everything my dad had worked for was just too much. I absolutely resented my grandparents after that, and I felt like I was on the brink of another downward spiral. So as soon as I graduated from high school, I took everything I could bring with me in a backpack and suitcase and moved back in with my uncle. He wanted to help me start another college fund, but he was already giving me free food and rent, and I didn't think it was right that he'd have to put me through college too. So, after I graduated high school, I took a break from school. I wasn't nearly as crafty as my dad, so I just worked as a waitress and picked up every other job I could find. I did that for about 2 years, then saved up enough money so I could go to university to become a nurse. Fast forward to when I was around 27. My life was looking pretty alright. I had a stable job, my own house, had just gotten married, and then another big bombshell was dropped into my life, again. I found out that my mother was actually still alive. I wasn't planned, and my mom wasn't financially nor emotionally ready for a kid, so she planned to put me up for adoption. My dad begged her not to, and said he'd take care of me if she wouldn't. So, when I was born, she literally just handed me over to him and left. They didn't make a case out of it or anything. My dad just took full responsibility without any hesitation. My uncle says that my dad made up the whole story of her dying so that I wouldn't grow up thinking my own mother didn't want me, and possibly also to not go looking for her. Nonetheless, she managed to find one of my aunts on Facebook and creeped her way to find me. My guess is that she saw some of our wedding photos or something. I was pretty upset with my uncle about the whole thing at first, since he knew all along and never bothered to tell me, at least when I became an adult. But then I realized that had I been in my mum's position when I was 18, I probably would doubted my ability to properly raise a child too. I thought that maybe things wouldn't have been the same for me if I grew up knowing the truth. Also, it's not like I missed out on much anyway. My dad and I were fine without her. We had the whole world at our feet with just the two of us. My mother and I never ended up meeting in person, and to this day, we still aren't very close. She has a family of her own, and she's always asking if we could meet one day, but I just don't feel like I'm ever going to be ready, even after so many years. My kids do, however, know she's their grandmother and they send each other gifts/cards on Christmas. Fast forward to now, I'm 34 and happily married with 3 kids under 6 and a 4th on the way. My husband's a pharmacist, and I'm the head nurse of the hospital where my dad passed away. We are well off, and living a life I never really imagined would be possible for me. I just wish that my dad was here to see it. None of it would have been possible without him. I'm still close with my uncle and catch up with him regularly, but I've distanced myself with my grandparents and don't really see my other relatives except on certain occasions, for instance weddings, etc. My husband and in-laws are amazing, though, and I'm thankful for them every day. P.S. Sorry for the long post, but thank you to anyone who took the time to read through it all. I've read a lot of books in my life, but my dad's story is my favorite one to tell. Thank you so much for watching. Please like and subscribe the channel.